Welcome to the All Things Real Estate podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the ever-changing world of real estate. We break down the latest trends, industry changes, and strategies you need to make informed decisions in today's housing market. Check out the show notes at the allthingsrealestatepodcast.com. This show is brought to you by ROOST Real Estate Company. If you're looking for real, actionable advice without the jargon, subscribe today. Now, here's your host, Chris McAllister.
Welcome back to the All Things Real Estate Podcast, the show where we go deep into what's really happening in today's housing market and help you make smarter and more confident decisions. I'm Chris McAllister, and I'm here today with Laci LeBlanc. Good morning, Laci. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great, Chris.
Well, today's episode is for every buyer out there who's been frustrated by bidding wars. You know, listings that just sell lightning fast and the feeling that, you're always one step behind. So that's what this episode is all about. So we're going to break down a new buyer resource that we just added to Buy with Roost on the Roost website, and it's called 10 Tips to Win a Bidding War, Competing Smarter in Today's Housing Market. So the truth is that winning in today's market isn't just about throwing more money at the problem. It's about strategy, it's about preparation, and it's knowing about how to give sellers and their agents the confidence that your deal will be the one that will actually get to the closing table and, just as importantly, close smoothly. So we're going to talk about why relationships and reputation can be worth more than, an extra $15,000 in offer price, how to use escalation clauses and appraisal gap coverage the right way, how the new commission rules can actually help buyers, and what really separates the buyers who win a bidding war from the ones who keep missing out. So grab your notebook or jump to the show notes and download your free copy of the PDF now, and you can follow along as we go. So.
Yeah, perfect. This is really timely. I think I wish I'd had this podcast years and years ago, actually, when I tried to buy my first house a little before, during, and eventually after COVID. And the bidding war was, we lost more than one house to people who were, it was a bidding war on every house we tried to get. So I think that in today's market, finding the right house is just half the battle. The real challenge is winning that house over other buyers. Why is that? Has that always been the case, or is this something new, or does it follow that cycle?
Well, a couple of things are going on in the market this spring. We absolutely expect to see more houses on the market this spring. However, what we're seeing with increased houses on the market is they're not really houses that have been listed at appropriate or even competitive prices. So the fact is, great houses, right? Well-priced houses that are in great shape, that inventory is still incredibly tight. Right. The most desirable homes are selling incredibly fast, often with multiple offers and, within 24 hours of getting a sign up in the yard. And most buyers think it's all about price, but what sellers are really looking for is confidence. They want to know that the deal that they choose to work through is going to close smoothly, it's going to close on time, and there's not going to be any surprises.
So the good news is for many of us that the biggest offer doesn't always win.
That's true. The winning offer is usually the one that feels the most solid to the seller. It's not necessarily the highest offer. It's all about certainty, preparation, and building trust.
So for those following along, we're going to kind of work through the guide here as well. So if you've got that downloaded, open the PDF or give us a pause and maybe download it and open it. But in the opening of the guide, you start by saying that relationships win deals, Chris. What do you mean by that?
Real estate still is, always has been, and always will be a people business, right? Yes, there's always technology. There's always the next cool thing on Zillow or Realtor.com, or something's AI generated this or AI just generated that. But the fact is, real estate is a people business, and listing agents want to work with buyers and with agents that they know will get the deal done without drama. So you could argue it's about reputation, right? And a trusted relationship, especially when your buyer agent is well known in the market, and there's a trusted relationship between your agent and the seller's agent, that relationship alone can outweigh a few extra $1,000s in price.
Yeah, so here we have a few agents around town that they feel like local celebrities, honestly, because everybody knows them.
They're
Everybody's
on the
worked
side
with
of the
them.
bus,
They're
right?
on the side of the bus. They're on
On
the
the
bench
benches.
waiting for the bus. Their sign is in, it feels like, every yard. And I think that's probably novel for everybody. That's cool. But what you're saying is that the agent's reputation, that really matters.
Yeah, what's behind the bus sign, I guess, exactly. So if the listing agent already knows your buyer's agent is professional and reliable, I'm going to tell you, they're going to push your offer to the top of the pile, right? If there's more than one offer, yes, listing agents are there to advise and counsel, but they're to advise and counsel on what's going to get to the closing table as more of a sure thing, right? It's about the terms. It's about when's it going to close? Is it going to close on time, et cetera. So they have so much influence over what that seller is going to do. And it makes sense because that seller is paying their listing agent a tremendous amount of money to make sure that they get the best possible offer for their house, top dollar terms that work for them, et cetera. And terms really are where it's about in this market. So your offer is going to get pushed to the top if your agent is well known in the market amongst the top producers and they have a good reputation. And sellers, again, they trust their agent's instincts. So when your agent, your buyer agent, has credibility, it's going to rub off on you too. A great buyer agent who comes with built-in credibility lends a tremendous amount of that credibility to you, the buyer.
Okay, so moving on, tip number 2 in the book is out-prepare the competition. We call it the 2-lender strategy. You recommend that buyers get pre-approved with 2 lenders. It feels a little like overkill for those of us who are maybe a little anxious about a relationship with a lender in the first place. Why do you recommend that?
Well, it does sound like overkill, but it's actually one of the smartest moves a buyer can make. If one lender hits a snag, say their underwriting slows down or an appraisal comes in late, you can instantly pivot. And sellers love knowing that you have a backup plan. Now, we're not going to get too deep in this today, but there is a big difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval. You can get a basic pre-approval that's completely dependent on the information you provide your lender without taking a ding to your credit score. At the very least, you should meet with more than one lender, at least 2 lenders, maybe even 3 lenders, because there is absolutely zero harm in getting a second opinion. When you run into buyers and you find out after the fact that the lender that they came to the table with or that they brought their pre-qual for on their offer was their 3rd or 4th choice, that's often a red flag, because the question is, why didn't the first lender or the second lender or the third lender why weren't they able to pre-qualify them? So as a buyer, you just want to anticipate that these are the thoughts, these are the concerns and fears that are going through that seller's head, and their listing agent has seen it all. So just make sure that you're covered. Know that you've got the best possible pre-qual that you possibly can from an absolutely reputable lender. And if you can get 2, get 2.
So is that information, I guess, that your real estate agent will share with the seller's agent or the sellers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You got to remember that your buyer agent is there to serve you. They have your interest and only your interest at heart. So whatever information, positive information that they can pass along to the seller to make sure your offer gets to the top of the pile, the better off. And bear in mind, listing agents know which lenders in town close smoothly and which ones tend to have problems. When your lender has a great reputation, your offer automatically looks stronger. It's just like with your buyer agent. A great lender, you're able to borrow their credibility as well. So a great agent and a great lender, well known in the market to all parties concerned, is going to make your offer that much stronger. A pre-qualification letter from a reputable lender gets you in the game, right? But a pre-qualification letter from a lender known to have a stellar reputation or a relationship with the listing agent of the home you want, that's the top of the game, right? It's like 2 levels there, and it's kind of subtle. But yes, you can get a pre-qual letter with a bank that we all know, but to get a pre-qual letter from the bank that the listing agent works with, is aware of, has great history with, that's really that's really one of those things that will tend to tip you over the top.
Like,
No listing agent, who's any has any experience whatsoever, you know, they know who the players are. They know the lenders that tend not to get to the closing table on time or if at all. So anytime you can play to the nuances, preferences, I guess, of the listing agent, the better off you're going to be.
it's that third party recommendation for you.
Yeah,
I guess is
exactly.
really what it is. Well, these are things I feel like if you're getting ready to buy a home, then you run into tips like make sure you get pre-approved, obviously work with someone reputable, but I think these are the more kind of practical step above that we've just talked about that maybe you don't hear everywhere. So I feel like that's really helpful. Moving on to tip three, though, I think we're encountering something that people, buyers in particular, don't know a ton about. So talk to me about escalation clauses. That just sounds complicated in my mind, but
Yeah.
what's the basic idea behind an escalation clause?
Well, the basic idea is you tell the seller, you make your best offer to the seller. If you tell them also in the offer that you will commit to beating any competing offer by a set amount, up to a cap. So let's say the house is, listed for 300,000, you come in and offer 310,000, but you also have an escalation clause that effectively says that you will meet or you will beat any other competing offer that comes in up to, let's say, 320,000. So it keeps you in the game without overpaying or making betting against yourself, right? By offering too much money up front. But it also gives you the opportunity to stay in the game if you've got other competing offers that are coming in that are higher than yours. Now, escalation clauses, like for instance in Columbus, Ohio, absolutely common. They happen all the time. Other markets maybe a little bit less so, but you definitely want to talk to your buyer agent about escalation clauses and educate yourself and make sure that your buyer agent is well versed in how escalation clauses work in your market.
Because it seems like to me that that's a very powerful tool to have in your tool belt if you're buying a home, but it also seems like you could make a mistake with that you could structure it wrong or so I mean, I feel like there's a mistake buyers probably make with this regularly.
Yeah. So with every, I guess I hate to say trick, but with every strategy like this, there's some potential risk, right? So it's possible that a buyer is going to forget about the potential appraisal gap, right? If the price goes higher than what the appraised value of the house comes back at, the lender's not going to cover that difference, right? If you offer 320 and the buyer accepts it, and the lender says that the house is only worth 310 and they will only offer 80% of 310, you've got to come up with the difference in cash for your down payment between the 310 and the 320, right? So it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean that the appraisal is lagging the market a little bit, and it doesn't mean that the house isn't worth 320 or that you could turn around and sell it for 320. But what you have to keep in mind is even though it's a smart deal, it's a fair deal, it's the right house, that still means that if you were planning to bring, 50,000 to the table, you've got to bring 60,000 to cover that difference. So smart buyers plan for that, or they cap the gap, so to speak, so that they don't get themselves in a bad situation.
Yeah, just another reason to have your finances and your pre-approvals all in order before you start house hunting so that you're prepared when this type of thing comes up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to tip number four, if you're following along in the PDF, it's called the new commission rules, a buyer's advantage. And this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the changes to the commission rules with the NAR settlement in 2024. It feels scary if you don't know what it's about and what it actually did, but you see it as an opportunity. How is that?
Well, for the first time, buyers get real transparency and control. Now, I shouldn't say for the first time, our agents at Roost Real Estate Company, we've always been very, very clear about how our buyer's agents get paid, how our listing agents get paid, how the money moves around and so forth. So we've always tried to be transparent. And I know, all of the very best realtors out there in the world have always done that. But we sort of lost a lot of ground during COVID when everything was done via .loop or DocuSign and so forth. But what this does is it defines and requires that level of transparency and control. So now you sign a written agreement with your agent, and you clarify and document in that agreement exactly what services you want. You're going to be able to negotiate, what you're paying for and how much you're paying your agent for their services. So that buyer agency agreement as a requirement is a big change, and it really is about empowerment. It's not about chaos, but it is about making it clear, what you're paying for and how much you're paying for it.
Yeah, and we have a whole podcast episode on, this topic, but can you just in a sentence or two tell me how buyers can use these new rules to their advantage? What can they do practically speaking to make sure that they are taking advantage of these new rules?
Well, the buyer agency agreement is very explicit, and it says what you are going to contract to have your agent do and how much you're going to pay for it. So if that buyer agent says that, your buyer agent finds you a house, gets you to the closing table, that you're going to pay them X% of the purchase price as their commission, this buyer agency agreement is saying that you're going to pay that regardless. Now, it doesn't necessarily, and in practice, virtually never means that you're going to have to come out of pocket for that commission. But what it does mean is that you're going to structure the offer so that you negotiate for the seller to ultimately pay what you owe your buyer agent. But getting that conversation and getting that understanding and getting that clarity out of the way early on with that buyer agency agreement is going to free your agent to move like lightning and be thrilled about working for you, because they know you understand the process, they know you're motivated, and quite frankly, they know they're going to get paid, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to structure your offer so the seller pays all or a minimum part, but it's generally still all of the agent fee that you agree to pay your buyer agent and their brokerage. So smart buyers use this flexibility as a strategic tool, right? They understand what a buyer agency agreement is. They understand what it looks like. They understand their obligations. They're fully prepared so that when they decide to commit to working with a buyer agent, they get that agreement signed, they get it signed early, and that truly does motivate and free your agent to do the best job they possibly can for you.
Yeah, I see this as another place where the relationships are really important. I think it requires a lot of trust to give somebody that, to let them move that fast, to let them kind of act on your behalf. That requires trust at the most basic level. So I think that's a really good argument for having relationships and basing this on relationships. But
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I get a little excited. So, we had an episode before where we talked about buy with Roost, and the whole idea that you can still pick up the phone, call a listing agent, and go look at a house. But before they walk you across that threshold, they're going to ask you to sign a buyer agency agreement. Now, you don't have to commit, just getting out of the car to working with somebody that you've never met before. So, feel free to cross anything out that has a number in it, put 0, put one-time showing, whatever you want to do. No, nobody's going to argue with you about that. But if you already have an agent that's been referred to you or you've worked with before, or you meet somebody, what you want to do as a buyer is you want to get a meeting with that agent, at their office, coffee shop, whatever, and you want to go through a whole interview process with that agent, and you want to make sure that that agent is absolutely going to do what you expect them to do. And if it turns out after you interview that agent or several agents that you find one that you trust, that you're happy to work with, and you're going to be just fine, paying them for their services, then get that buyer agency agreement signed before you ever go outside and start looking at houses.
Perfect. Good advice, as always. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk about contingencies. Contingencies in my mind can make or break a deal, but there has to be a balance, right? What's the right balance when it comes to contingencies?
We were in that crazy market after, during and after COVID. People were buying houses without doing inspections whatsoever. They were waiving every contingency possible, whether it was appraisals or inspections. It was crazy. So my advice is never, ever, ever go into a contract unprotected, but you can shorten some of the timelines instead of waiving them on the contingencies. For example, maybe you commit to completing your inspections within 5 days instead of 10 days, right? It shows the seller that you're serious without being reckless, right? Tighten the window. It's going to make it a little tougher for you and your agent to get that done, but it's going to also give the seller confidence that, if you come back in 5 days and you're not happy with how the inspection turned out, or you found something, you can't work it out, they can get back to market quicker rather than having to, wait out an extended period of time.
Well, the title of this tip is Get Creative with Contingencies. So what other creative approaches do you have in mind?
Well, there's always contingencies in a purchase offer. For the appraisal, right? There's a contingency that says that, the house has to appraise for the value and that you contract for, unless there's an escalation clause in there. There's always a contingency for having inspections done. Nobody's going to force you to buy a house without going in and looking for those items that maybe weren't clear when you took a walk through the house. Identifying those items that might adversely affect habitability. That's a standard contingency. But the other things that you can do is, you can write in, let's say that the issue with let's say your seller needs time to move, right? So this is sort of a contingency, but you can write in something into your contract that says that you're going to offer post-closing possession for the seller, right? So you've gone through everything you can on the contingencies to make it go fast, give the seller a comfort level that you're not, dragging this thing out and it's going to end badly. But the other thing that you can sometimes do to move your offer to the top of the list is find out what the seller's time frame is. Find out if the seller already has purchased another house, right? Find out if they need time to move. So let's say, for instance, that the seller is excited to accept your offer, but it turns out they haven't nailed down their house yet, or it hasn't been built yet, or whatever. You can be flexible as you could possibly be at the closing date and on possession date, right? So one of the things you can even do, if a seller needs time to move, you can go ahead and close on the house, but have an agreement at closing that lets them rent back the house for a certain period of time, and you will charge them rent, right? You're still going to get paid. Yes, you're going to own their house. Yes, there's some risks in there, but I tell you, in a tight market, it's something that if you're comfortable offering based on what your buyer agent knows about the situation, based on what they hear from the listing agent and so forth, doing a rent back or allowing the seller to stay in the house a few days past the closing could be one of the best tools you have in your pocket to win a bidding war if you've got multiple offers.
Yeah, so another tool that has now become controversial. I know that our agent, when we were trying to buy a house during the COVID market and everything was a bidding war, she told us to write a personal letter about the property because we had some connections to the location. But now that's kind of a controversial thing to do. Can you still do it? Are they still worth doing? What has changed about these personal letters, and how can we still use them?
I have to be honest with you. I always thought the personal letters were kind of silly, kind of annoying, because
I
many
thought
times.
that too as I was writing it.
Yeah.
As a writer, I was really waxing poetic about myself and my family. And so I don't, you know,
Yeah.
I may have
Well, to have,
exaggerated on some things, right? How much can you trust them anyway?
let's put it this way: if a house is worth 350,000 and you've only got 300,000, I don't care what kind of personal note you write, the seller's not going to drop their price by 50 grand. So let's think about that. It's absolutely no substitute for a competitive offer, right? So I guess there's a place for these letters, and obviously I apologize. I'm not the right person to ask, but there's a place for them. They can still be worth doing, but you got to do it right. So you want to make sure you focus the letter on the home itself. You don't want to be focusing this on your personal life. You want to talk about what you love about the property, the architecture, the layout, the location, maybe even what the seller has done to the property, right? Play on their vanity. But the last thing you want to do is to go in there with a letter talking about your family or background or personal information.
And why is that? So what's the distinction there? Why is that so important?
Because believe it or not, there's a place where fair housing laws come into play. So fair housing laws exist to protect certain classes of people. So even innocent details like our kids love the backyard can ultimately create legal exposure for the seller, the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, right? Because you're talking about people, right? So keep it about the house, and you're going to stay safe. And I'm sure if this is something that you really want to do and you think it'll help, then you can still find ways to connect emotionally with that seller by keeping the personal things out that can cause you to run afoul of fair housing laws.
Right. And I feel like not every seller is going to care about a letter. We wrote our letter because the seller was requesting letters. I think because they anticipated having so many offers and they wanted help choosing.
Yeah. No,
I don't, you know.
some sellers, really care about that. In my experience, it's a small fraction of the sellers out there that care about that. They're more pragmatic than that, but it does happen. And, you know, did it help you? Did you get the house you wanted?
No, we sure didn't. We wrote the letter, we sent it in with our offer, and the house ended. I mean, I think that the winning offer was literally we sent it in at. I think we offered maybe 10,000 over asking, and the winning offer was I think 30,000 over
Yeah.
asking, and that just no amount of my personal life, as beautiful as I made it look on paper, was gonna make up for that extra 20 grand. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Well, the topic still comes up, so I think it's important to keep it on this list. So that's why it's here.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of which, tip number 7 is add value beyond the price. So some sellers we've discussed care about more than money. So what, in addition to that, do they really care about? So what, and other than your personal, beautiful life, what do they care about?
They care about certainty, they care about convenience, and they care about timing. In other words, we've said it already 3 or 4 times today. It's not just about the money, it's about the terms, right? If you can make their life easier, like we talked, letting them stay in the house for a week after closing, that alone can mean far more than, an extra $5,000 on the offer. So think about what's in it for the seller, what's in it for them, and what can you do as a buyer to structure a deal that takes care of what their wants, needs, and concerns are?
So just once more for the people just catching up. It's
In
not
the cheap
always
seats.
about, right. It's not always about the highest bid.
It's not always about the highest bid. Sometimes, and I would say honestly, Laci, more often than not, the best offer is the one that removes stress, not just adds money. That's what separates savvy buyers from emotional ones. You've got weak buyers out there, that will make a crazy offer that may or may not close, just to get a chance. There's just, I understand people, get emotional about houses. They fall in love with houses. They want to buy a house in the worst way, but you got to balance that emotional part of it with the fact that this truly is a business transaction, and quite frankly, it's the largest transaction most of us ever make in our entire lives. So yes, money matters, but there's a place where money doesn't do it all. It's really about the terms that work for the seller.
Yeah, I mean, if
Excuse
anybody
me.
can remove my stress at all in any area of my life, I'm going to prefer them over others. So that makes sense to me. I think that all of this together is what comes together to make the perfect offer package, which is tip number 8. What does the perfect offer package look like, Chris?
All right, it's clean, it's complete, it's professional, right? Most offers these days are done in .loop or DocuSign. There is no excuse anymore for an illegible or incomplete purchase contract, or an illegible or incomplete offer package. You want to make sure that your buyer agent has enough attention to detail, right? As we say, enough executive function to make sure that every single blank is filled in, every document is set up perfectly. It's crisp. It's easy to read. There's just no mistakes. And maybe add a short summary in there from your agent, as to why your offer is what it is, explaining why you feel that your offer is strong. But let me tell you, presentation builds trust. It builds instant confidence. I cannot tell you how many offers that I fielded over the years where it's like, holy crap. I mean, this is a legal document. You got to get some attention to detail here. So don't take anything for granted. Make sure that you review that purchase document, before you sign it, whether it's electronically or in person. And I truly believe that a lot of what got us in trouble with the whole NAR lawsuit, after, COVID, was that during COVID, everybody was so excited to get houses. It was just an absolute frenzy, right? And what happened was, the buyers in so many cases just truly didn't understand what they were signing. And in many cases, I'm sure that the documents could have been prepared better. They could have been more complete. They could have been presented better, and they quite frankly, weren't. So there's enough blame to go around. But again, I can't stress this enough. The package matters. How it's presented matters. This is a small thing too, but during the frenzy, we as listing agents, we would get offers and it would say that I want an answer to this offer by 6 o'clock tonight. Well, you got to be reasonable in your expectations. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, not one of those buyers didn't still want the house if they missed the 6 o'clock deadline, right? So again, don't be annoying, be professional, keep it together, and you're going to go a hell of a lot farther.
So in your offer package, this also seems like a place where the agent's reputation and name could be of influence.
Oh my God. Listing agents know which buyer's agents are organized and which ones are, have a reputation for just being sloppy, right? A polished package from a respected agent says this deal will close smoothly. It sounds trivial, at the end of the day, $500,000 house, does it really matter? I'm here to tell you, if you really want to buy that house, if you really want to close on that house, it matters.
So this might be a little controversial, and it's definitely not in the script, but I'm thinking about my brother who moved to Mexico and decided to not use a family agent or a friend. He literally called the top producing agent in our area. We all know because she's everywhere. She's fantastic. I think there's a reason for that. He sold his house for exactly what he wanted to sell it for. It went really, really quickly. So I guess my not so much question as tip might be to, if you've got that cousin who does real estate part-time, think about it. You certainly want to support your family, but I do think that my brother's situation and lots of folks, transaction went a lot more smoothly than it could have,
Yeah.
versus using a part-time agent that just happens to be a family friend or, does that make sense?
You want to be very, very careful about working with an agent who maybe does 1 or 2 transactions a year. So yes, you want to support your family. If you really want to go out of your way to try to support your family, then go to the listing agent or the buyer agent that you're comfortable working with and negotiate that part of the commission goes as a referral fee to your cousin, right? I mean, don't do anything to insult that agent, because a good buyer agent is worth every single penny. But you're right. You can really mess up your home purchase. You can lose multiple bidding wars if you're working with somebody who, is part of the family and you're trying to be nice. But if they don't have the experience or the wherewithal to get that offer to the top of the pile and get it accepted and get it closed, you're not doing yourself or your family any favors. So thanks for bringing that
was
up.
Mostly about giving people permission, right?
Yeah.
To
We'll
look
call
elsewhere.
that bonus tip 11. How's that? I like that one.
Sounds good. Yeah. Maybe don't put that one in writing. I don't know. Oh, but speaking of the tips that are in writing, tip number 9 is master condo and HOA purchases. So buying into an HOA or condo community sounds complicated. It does factor in to the bidding war. Why does it matter so much?
Well, homeowner associations and condo associations and all that, there's a lot of moving parts there that can disrupt a closing, that can cause grief after closing. And a lot of deals fall apart over HOA, homeowner association, and condo association issues. So you want to make sure that your buyer agent, even before you submit the offer, make sure that they get a copy from the listing agent of the homeowner association rules and bylaws or the condo association rules and bylaws so that you can familiarize yourself with them. And here's a little bit of a tip, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, you should review these with an attorney if you have questions, but if you're into ChatGPT these days, upload that document to ChatGPT, ask it to summarize for you, ask questions, search for keywords that you're worried about and things like that. But a lot of issues fall apart over HOA, and they tend not to happen till the last minute because those documents are the last thing on an excited buyer's or an excited seller's mind. Right? If you've already reviewed the rules, the fees, the restrictions, especially rental limitations on a property, and you've acknowledged that you've gotten copies of those, you've read them, you understand them, you are a credible buyer who won't back out halfway through. And these rental restrictions, they're getting harder and harder. We bought a house in Florida a few years ago, and when we bought it, there were zero restrictions on short-term rentals in the neighborhood. As soon as we started advertising our property on Airbnb, the HOA suddenly came up with a rule that said you can't have short-term rentals in the neighborhood anymore. So, we had to talk to an attorney and write a stern letter and say, hey, this wasn't the rule when we bought the house. But my point is, you'd be surprised of what the kind of things that'll show up, right or wrong, in association documents. So get those up front, read through them, make sure you get your questions answered, and be prepared to move forward or get out quickly.
Yeah, rental limitations was the first thing that came to my mind. What else should buyers check before making an offer in those HOA documents or condo association documents?
You want to confirm what the fees are every month, right? Our little subdivision in Florida, it's a twice a year payment, and it's not a lot of money. It's enough to, I guess, maintain the pond or something. But you want to know what those fees are. You want to know how often they can be raised and so forth. You want to in a condo, you also want to review the condo's financial statements. Generally condo associations are responsible for, replacing the roofs when they go bad on a condo. Do they have enough money? Do they have reserves? Do they have the financial wherewithal to keep up with their part of the bargain per the condo association fees? And make sure your lender is comfortable with the community. Not all lenders finance condos easily at all. And some condos won't go FHA and some condos won't go conventional. There's just so many things that can happen, especially on a condo, more so than an HOA, that it's a podcast in and of itself. So the more prepared you are, the more the seller is going to trust you. And again, this whole thing, if you're an investor who even have any thoughts about turning your home into a short-term rentals at some point in the future, this is the time that you ask that question explicitly and get those answers in writing.
Yeah, I've got two friends. They both live in condos with their own condo association rules. One of them had to go to court for their condo because their condo association did not have the money to do the repairs to the roofs. Actually, that's exactly why they went.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not only stressful, but it didn't pan out as well as they wanted it to. And then I've got a friend who wants to move out of her condo and cannot rent it. And she knew that going in, but so now she's faced with, renting somewhere else if she wants to move while her condo sells. So she thought at that time that it wasn't a big deal, but turns out when she's ready to move, it is. So I think that's, again, this is a lot to keep up with. I think having an agent, a buyer's agent who knows this like the back of their hand and can really help remind you what to look for every step of the way. Not that you can print this PDF out and take it with you, but
Please
that just
do.
seems important.
I'm super excited about how this PDF turned out, and I'd love to get everybody's feedback on it. But yeah, it's just you can get so caught up in the excitement of the moment that some of these things, these 10 tips, they can just fall by the wayside. So I just want you to be aware and ask the right questions going in.
Well, speaking of, tip number 10 is stay strategic and flexible. So you end this guide by saying that flexibility is really the secret weapon. Tell me what you mean by that.
Homes are moving fast. We're recording this, the first week of February. I always say the spring selling season happens right after Valentine's Day. Homes start to move fast. You get one good warm weekend and suddenly everybody's coming out, getting out of the house because we've all been cooped up the past 10 days, right? Homes will start to move fast, and you might need to tour the same day that the house hits the market, or be prepared to write an offer, within hours of the home listing hitting the market. And you can't do that with confidence if you haven't done a lot of homework up front with your buyer agent, getting that buyer agency agreement, buyer representation agreement signed, getting your pre-qual, getting your pre-approval, and so forth. But yeah, you've got to move fast, and there's times you got to take off work to do that, or you might miss the house. Buyers who can move and pivot quickly, who already have their paperwork together, they absolutely win more often than buyers who have zero flexibility.
Well, and then on the other side of that coin is losing, right? When you lose out a home, as the resident emotional one here, there is an emotional side to this, and losing out can be tough for folks. So what would you say to those people?
Yeah, absolutely true. It sucks to lose a house that you really decide that is perfect for you, that you fall in love with. But patience always wins. Flexibility always wins. You never want to, fall so deeply in love with the property that, you start throwing money at the sellers, throwing money at the problem. You've got to stay calm. You've got to trust your process. And you've got to remember, the right home will come up and it will align with your budget and your timing. And, nobody wants to hear this, but you may lose the first one, two, three houses that you bid on, before, you get the next one. So, I want everybody to do the best you can to try to keep a little bit emotional distance from from the home itself, until you get through that whole offer process and so forth. But the whole purpose of this podcast, the whole purpose of this PDF is to give you the tools, the tips, the confidence to do as much work upfront as you possibly can, so that you are the one that has the best shot at being selected as the winning offer.
Yeah, so that's kind of the takeaway that you want people to remember, right? Can you tell us what the takeaway is?
Winning in this market isn't about luck. It isn't about outbidding everybody else. It's absolutely about confidence. It's about preparation. It's about building trust, and it's about having the right strategy. All of those things are going to make you stand out in a multiple offer situation. And when you have the right buyer agent by your side, you can compete and you can win and you can keep your sanity.
If you say so. Easier said than done, Chris, I think. We do have a lot of resources, though, if people want to learn a little bit more about some of these strategies and start putting them to work.
Well, if you're in Ohio or the Space Coast of Florida, call us. We'll get you in touch with an agent that's going to take great care of you. You can always visit realestatecompany.com for tips. And again, you're going to find the 10 tips PDF in the show notes, and you can download that.
Perfect.
So I think we're ready to wrap this up. So I just want to conclude with buying a home in today's market. It can feel like stepping into a game where the rules change daily, maybe twice a day, but confidence wins. And the buyers who get their offers accepted aren't always the one with the deepest pockets. They're the ones who are prepared, they're flexible, they're working with an agent who knows how to play the game. At our company, Roost Real Estate Company, that's what our agents help our buyer clients do, whether it's from lender prep to negotiation. Our buyers know how to build trust with sellers and close deals that make sense for our buyers. So hopefully this is helpful to everybody listening. Best of luck this home buying season, as spring truly is just around the corner. And don't forget to subscribe to the All Things Real Estate podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Laci, thank you very much.
My pleasure. We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.